When it comes to the classic beat-em-up brawlers, you might think of Streets of Rage, Final Fight, or even the great Battletoads Double Dragon game. These old-school beat-em-ups share many of the same great qualities to make for timeless and memorable experiences. These beat-em-ups gave great satisfaction to all of your hits so that you could really feel that impact. One of the other most important elements are the different pickups that you can find. These new weapons and items give you a nice boost of empowerment as you use them. During the PS1 generation, people were still looking for these beat-em-up-like experiences. At one time, a 3D sequel was being planned for the Streets of Rage franchise. After making the well-received Tomb Raider, Core Design wanted to tackle the beat-em-up genre. Sega was initially interested in Core Design's new 3D beat-em-up, and Sega wanted to take what they had and apply it to their Streets of Rage franchise. Eventually, this resulted in Sega dropping the project. Core Design wanted to still move on with their idea and make a new standalone game that was heavily inspired by Streets of Rage. I present to you a look back at Fighting Force. In 1996, Core Design released the successful Tomb Raider for the PS1 console. Tomb Raider was a great success for them, and they began work on Tomb Raider sequels. At the same time, Core Design was interested in the beat-em-up genre and bringing a new experience to current generation systems. The developers began work on a game called Judgment Force. This game caught the interest of Sega, who owned the rights to Streets of Rage. Sega wanted Core Design to complete the game for them and rename the game Streets of Rage 4. This seemed like a great opportunity for Core Design. They had just started their Tomb Raider franchise, and now they would be responsible for a sequel to the beloved Streets of Rage games. During development, issues broke out between Core Design and Sega. Sega wanted Streets of Rage 4 to be an exclusive to the Sega Saturn, while Core Design wanted to release their new beat-em-up on all major platforms. This created a lot of friction between the publisher and the developer. Eventually, this caused Sega to pull out of the deal, and thus, this new brawler could not be released as a sequel to the Streets of Rage franchise. Core Design took this opportunity to take their game and release it as a completely new game that featured inspirations from the classic beat-em-up games. Core Design's goal was to take what was great about that genre and apply it to 3D. Their game was going to feature 4 playable characters, fun weapon pickups, and engaging action. Out of all of this, Fighting Force was born. The development of this game is an interesting one, considering it took until 2020 for a Streets of Rage 4 to be released. The drama between Core Design and Sega is one that I can see from both sides. Core Design showed great quality with the release of the first Tomb Raider, so it made sense that Sega would want to work with them. But Core Design wanted their game to hit a wider audience, and potentially releasing their new game on all major platforms could give them the best shot with this. But Streets of Rage is a Sega IP, and that is something that Sega wanted to keep to their system with the Sega Saturn. I think in the long run, creating the game under the Fighting Force name rather than Streets of Rage 4 was probably the better idea. With Streets of Rage having 3 prior games in a certain style, fans of that series would expect a similar style and execution in a sequel. Though I do think that if Fighting Force was presented as a 3D spin-off to Streets of Rage, then it could have worked out well. Either way, Fighting Force eventually came out and turned out to be a pretty good 3D beat-em-up. In October 1997, Fighting Force was released to the world. Fighting Force features many of the expected elements from a beat-em-up while providing a solid execution to that formula. Fighting Force provides you with 4 different characters to choose from. Alana is the fastest character of the bunch. Her hits are very quick, and she has a really useful spin attack for her running kick, making it really easier to hit multiple enemies with one run. Mace has the longest reach with her kicks. Hawk is your expected average fighter and is a good go-to for your first run. And lastly, Smasher is big and slower and rather awesome to use. The 4 characters are not drastically different from each other, but there are some nice differences that allow for some fun and experimentation when you are selecting a different character. You have several different moves at your disposal while you are in combat. You can punch, kick, jump, back punch, grab, and do running attacks. These different moves can be mixed and matched to create different moves and combos. The punch and kick can be combined for some expected combos as well. Some of the more interesting attacks are some of the fun grab moves that you can pull off. When you grab an enemy, you can pull off different grab moves depending on the other buttons that you press after grabbing an enemy. Some characters will do flips and cool grapple-like moves, while Smasher will just pick up the enemy and you can throw them. An interesting omission from the game is the lack of any block button. While not necessarily an issue, but rather an observation. There is no means to basically block attacks, but you can use the jump button or the run button to resituate yourself and potentially avoid enemy attacks. Many of the enemies will actively block your attacks, but even a block punch can still do some damage. Grabs and combos can also be used to break through those blocks as well. Now, an interesting aspect to a beat 'em up are the fun and empowering pickups that will help you along the way. The pickups in Fighting Force are very fun to use. In Fighting Force, you can use a wide variety of different pickups. You have ranged weapons like throwable barrels, usable handguns, shotguns, and even a fun rocket launcher. Then there are many melee weapons to use, like a fireman's axe, batons, knives, and broken bottles. The guns have limited ammo, and they can give you a big advantage. One aspect that I really like that fit into the style of the game is how you can throw your depleted weapon at an enemy. It's a small thing, but it's so awesome to do. There are some cool instances of improvising through some of the destructible objects. For example, if you smash a car, a bunch of tires will fall off and you can use those tires as weapons. Along with this, there is a chance that the trunk will pop open and provide you with a good weapon like a rocket launcher. The fact that you can punch a car and blow it up is comical, but it also feels like it's in line with the tone and general fun of this game. This also feeds into getting some of the valuable healing items. Healing items are usually pieces of food that are dropped by enemies or medkits found on the levels. You can also punch a soda machine and drink the dropped soda from it. Essentially, if you think you can punch it, then you probably can, and it's probably your best way to proceed. Many walls need to be punched to get to the next area. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is still silly, but it's also awesome as it fits the genre so well. The attacks and hits are satisfying to pull off with some decent impact. Enemies have exaggerated deaths, adding to the impact of your hits. There are some boss fights to help break up the action. For the most part, these are just slightly modified enemies with more health. One unique aspect about the game that I did enjoy is how there are 2 points where you can choose which level you want to go to. This element of choice is really light, but it allows you to see different locations when you are replaying the game. And lastly, the game offers 2-player co-op, and while the friendly fire can be annoying, it also creates some funny situations that you can have with your friends. Surprisingly, the game holds up pretty well. Like many games from this generation, the visuals do look dated, but the gameplay is still enjoyable, though I did have a few flaws with it. One thing that was a bit odd when the game was released, along with how it is presented now, is how it's a bit wonky to target enemies in the game. Sometimes you will attempt to punch enemies in front of you, and you might just miss. For melee attacks, you get used to this, and you can kind of adapt to the flow in this game. The ranged weapons create a bit more of a frustration because aiming can be hit and miss when you're shooting at something. The boss fights were mostly fine, but the jetpack one is kinda cheap with all the many stuns that he can throw at you. Outside of this, Fighting Force remains a short and sweet beat 'em up with solid execution. One last area that I want to highlight is the soundtrack. This is another area that is important to the beat 'em up genre, and Fighting Force delivers with some good tracks. Here are some tracks from the game. Fighting Force is an underrated game from the PS1 era. Like a good arcade game, it provides a solid, short and sweet experience that you can enjoy with a friend. The action mostly holds up, even today. It checks many of the boxes that you want from a beat 'em up and executes them with some style. The punches and kicks are fun to land, and the weapon pickups are empowering, and the location variety is decent along with a solid soundtrack. The drama between Core Design and Sega is an interesting one, with this game potentially becoming Streets of Rage 4. And while that idea is an interesting one, I think it was a better idea to have Fighting Force be its own thing. If you enjoy beat 'em ups, I would recommend you check this one out.